sometimes, you just come across these stories and you think, wow, this has got to be straight out of the headlines.
Right.
This whole Olivia Nuzzi and Ryan Lizza thing, that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
It's got all the ingredients of like a political thriller.
It really does.
You've got power struggles, ambition, secrets, and a scandal that's like sending shockwaves, through the whole D.C. journalism scene.
Yeah, and I think what makes it so compelling is, it's not just your typical gossip column fodder.
Right.
It really digs into, like, what does success even mean in a place like D.C.?
Right.
Where it's all about who you know and what kind of power you can wield.
Exactly.
And it also makes you think about the baggage we all carry from our past.
Absolutely. And the article kind of throws us right into the thick of it,
Yeah.
painting this picture of Nuzzi and Lizza at the 2023 White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Uh-huh.
Here we're like the it couple.
Yeah.
At the top of their game, rubbing shoulders with everyone who's anyone in politics.
They seemed unstoppable.
Right, and she's what, like 30 years old?
Yeah, young.
He's a bit older. But still, they both had these really impressive resumes,
It's true, and yet I think there's that saying, right, like, appearances can be deceiving.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think underneath this facade of, this power couple, there was this much more complicated, ultimately kind of volatile relationship dynamic going on.
Yeah, and then you bring Robert F. Kennedy Jr. into the mix.
Right.
And suddenly everything changes.
Yeah, it throws a wrench in the whole thing.
Right. Like their relationship, which supposedly started after she interviewed him for a profile.
Yeah.
It kind of becomes this catalyst for this whole scandal that ends up like really impacting both of their lives.
Yeah, it's like that's where those lines between ambition and your personal choices, they just get completely blurred.
Totally. Yeah, and the article even mentions how even before this whole thing blew up, Nuzzi had this reputation for being, very bold, maybe even like pushing the limits to get a story.
Pushing the boundaries a little bit.
Yeah, like there were accusations of trespassing and even getting kicked out of Trump's hush money trial, right?
Oh.
Taking unauthorized photos and stuff.
So she had a bit of a history.
Yeah, and it makes you think, like, when does a journalist's drive to get the story, especially when it involves these powerful figures, when does it cross the line?
Right, because on the one hand, you admire that drive, that ambition to uncover the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, if you're cutting corners, if you're, not playing by the rules,
right,
it makes you question, the integrity of the whole thing.
And then you have Lizza on the other side, who built his entire career on exposing this kind of behavior.
Right. The hypocrisy is pretty astounding.
Right. It's like something out of a movie.
It really is. It's like, how does that even happen?
And the article really dives into Liz's family background.
Yeah.
And it's kind of shocking what they uncover.
Like, talk about skeletons in the closet.
Right. This is like organized crime level stuff.
Yeah. His past is like deeply, deeply entangled with organized crime in Long Island.
Yeah. And Lizza, I mean, this is a guy who was known for his integrity, for pursuing the truth.
Right.
And it turns out his family allegedly was involved with this group, the Club of Five.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about them.
Essentially controlling like the asphalt industry.
Wow.
Through these really shady bid rigging schemes.
Yeah. And it wasn't just like rumors or anything. Like his own father, his uncles, they were indicted.
Yeah.
On all sorts of charges.
So this wasn't just like some distant relative.
No, this was his inner circle.
Right.
His uncle, Carl Lizza Jr., he was found liable in this huge ICO trial because of these activities.
And a RICO trial, just so everyone knows.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It's a really big deal. It's how the government goes after organized crime.
Right.
Right, like they're trying to dismantle these corrupt businesses.
Exactly.
And get this.
What?
The lawyer who brought that RICO case against Liz's uncle?
No way.
A young Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah.
When he was a U.S. attorney.
Wow. You can't make this stuff up.
Talk about a small world, right?
It's too much.
Especially in politics and law.
It's insane.
And the irony is just, it's almost laughable.
Oh, I know.
Like, here's Lizza building his career on exposing corruption.
Right.
And it was happening right under his own roof.
In his own family.
And then his other uncle, Elia Lizza,
yeah,
convicted of bribing, like a local official.
No way.
To get favorable treatment on these development deals for his company, Carlo Lizza and Sons Paving.
Wow.
And that company, they got almost $100 million in county contracts.
Are you serious?
So we're talking about a deeply ingrained culture of corruption here.
Yeah.
And it's like the opposite of everything Lizza was trying to build in D.C.
Right. The contrast is stark.
It makes you think, like, how much do these family legacies,
Right.
even when we try to distance ourselves from them,
Absolutely.
how much do they really shape us?
Yeah.
And Liz is a perfect example.
I mean, this is a guy who dedicated his life to uncovering the truth.
Yeah.
And his own past is like completely intertwined with his family's, questionable dealings.
Yeah, and you can't help but wonder, like, how did that background shape him?
Absolutely.
How did it affect his views on ambition, on power?
His understanding of the lengths people will go to
Exactly.
get what they want.
And we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper in just a moment. But first, it's just wild how both Nuzzi and Lizza, on the surface, they had it all.
Right. They seem to have it all figured out.
But behind the scenes, it was a completely different story.
Yeah, and all those hidden tensions, those contradictions, they really come to a head with this whole affair in the aftermath.
Right, because then you have Nuzzi accusing Lizza of blackmail.
Yeah, which is a huge accusation to make.
Talk about a plot twist.
Right, like
Yeah.
out of nowhere.
Claiming he threatened to reveal all this personal stuff about her if she ever tried to leave him.
And you got to remember, this is Lizza, a journalist known for his integrity, for taking on powerful people.
Yeah, I mean, that was his whole thing, exposing the dark underbelly of D.C.
Right, and now he's being accused of using information as leverage, as a weapon.
Talk about hypocrisy, right?
Yeah.
It really makes you question everything.
Totally, and I mean, you have to think about Nuzzi's side of it too.
Absolutely.
It's not just personal betrayal.
Right.
This is a professional nightmare for her.
Her career could be over.
She goes from being this rising star to tabloid fodder literally overnight.
It's brutal, and it makes you wonder if a man would be treated the same way.
Exactly. Like, there's definitely a gender dynamic at play here.
Totally, like we've seen it time and time again.
Ambitious men, they're celebrated, they're go-getters.
But ambitious women.
Oh, they're labeled as aggressive or difficult or, there's something wrong with that.
It's a double standard, and it's still so prevalent.
Totally. And I think this whole situation just highlights how, women in positions of power, especially in fields like journalism, they're held to this completely different standard.
And if they dare to challenge the status quo.
Forget about it. They become targets.
So where do they go from here? I mean, they're both on leave, facing legal battles. Their careers are hanging by a thread.
Yeah, it's hard to see a way back from this, It makes you think of other power couples like Carl Bernstein and Nora Ephron.
Oh, interesting comparison.
Their breakup was very public, very messy.
Yeah, and Ephron, she took that pain, that heartbreak, and turned it into art.
Right. Became this incredibly successful screenwriter, author.
It makes you wonder if Nuzzi or Lizza can do the same.
Yeah, can they channel this experience into something positive,
Reinvent themselves.
Only time will tell, I guess. But one thing's for sure, this whole ordeal, it really makes you think about ambition and how far is too far.
It's like they got so caught up in the game, in climbing that ladder in D.C., they lost sight of everything else.
Right. Like, at what cost? At what point do you step back and say, is it really worth it?
And it's not just ambition, right? It's about the stories we tell ourselves, the image we try to project.
Nuzzi, for instance, she had this knack for getting close to these powerful men, often flawed men.
It was like her trademark.
And maybe with RFK Jr., she got seduced by that whole Kennedy mystique.
Yeah, the glamour, the legacy, the idea of being part of that world.
It's easy to see how that could happen, right?
Ah.
But it's also a cautionary tale.
Absolutely. It reminds you that even the most seasoned journalists, they can get blinded by the allure of power, of access, of getting that exclusive story.
It's almost like we get so caught up in creating this perfect image for the world to see,
Oh, absolutely. And especially in this day and age with social media,
Yeah.
everyone's curating their lives, their careers, their relationships, trying to make it look like, everything's amazing.
But are things ever really that perfect? Right. And I think this whole Nuzzi-Lizza saga, it kind of exposes that undercurrent of, there's always more than meets the eye.
There's always another side to the story. It's like that saying, don't believe everything you read.
And especially don't believe everything you see.
So true. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, is there one big takeaway, that you hope our listeners really walk away with?
I think for me, what's really striking is, how easily these narratives that we build for ourselves, the images we project, they can just crumble when these hidden truths come to light.
It's a good reminder that none of us are immune to that.
Not at all.
We all have our secrets, our vulnerabilities.
And I think this story, it's not just about ambition or power. It's also a story about the stories we tell
For the
ourselves,
compromises we make along the way.
and the price that we might end up paying for those choices.
Well said, and it certainly has given us a lot to think about.
It really has.
Thanks for diving into this with me.
My pleasure. It's been great chatting with you.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.